Hi everyone, my name is Miri, and here's my talk on developer portals, API catalogs, and marketplaces, and how to choose the right tool for your API consumers. So I already said my name is Miri. I'm lead API consultant at codecentric. Feel free to also connect to me on LinkedIn if you want to. We also had a booth at API Days, but this is not relevant right now. I'm mainly working in the API space since 3.5 years. I'm only doing API consulting, so I'm mainly working in API enablement and API operations, automating anything regarding APIs. But today, why do we have this talk? Why does this topic even matter to talk about discovery channels like developer portals and catalogs and marketplaces? So I think you all know that the API ecosystem is growing in complexity all the time. APIs are basically everywhere. So they are critical for digital strategies, and managing them is not so easy. Also, we have many topics to handle. So the API ecosystem consists of many different topics, discoverability being one of them, but we also need onboarding. We have to take care of integration, governance, monetization, operations, versioning, deprecation, you name it. So there's a lot around that we need to handle if we talk about APIs. And we have different tools available for discovery, and each serves a unique purpose, but often it's a bit confused or mixed up. So it's really important to choose the right tool that you get the adoption and success you want. So we're looking into this today. But if you're talking about pod catalogs and marketplaces, the first question is, who will be your API consumers? Who is this tool targeted to? So we'll start with a look on the API consumers. What are their pain points? What do they want to achieve, right? We should start there because those are the people the tool is made for. So first of all, they want discoverability. That means they want to find an API that's fitting their use case, or they want to understand why there are multiple APIs that might fit to their use case or do the same thing. So they want very easily find a matching API. The second one is onboarding. They want to get started very quickly. They probably don't want to read 20 pages of documentation before making their first API call. They want to start, right? The next one is integration and usage. So they want to know how to make an API work in their specific environment, and also whether the API is stable, reliable, and secure, and whether they can use it for their integration. And last but not least, they also need a certain business alignment. They need to know whether they can use the API commercially or in their environment. And also, if there are too many APIs, they might not know which one aligns best with their business. So we keep these pain points in mind, but now let's jump to what is actually a developer portal, a catalog, and a marketplace. A developer portal usually provides a self-service access to APIs. So it's enabling seamless onboarding, documentation, and integration support. And if you think about it, developer portal, it already has the developer in the name. So the primary audience is usually technical, because people who are not developers might not be attracted from a tool called developer portal, right? The typical feature set is it provides definitely API documentation on a very technical level, of course. This includes SDKs, sample code, Bruno and Postman collections, everything you need to work with the API. Also, authentication and API key token management. I can get some credentials for the API. I can exchange them if I need to, or renew them if they got leaked. Also, interactive API explorations and sandboxes to start very quickly using the APIs. And of course, some sort of developer support if the developer has a very technical question, for example, a support forum or something alike. To summarize it, a developer portal helps developers understand how to use the API. It reduces friction in integration and first-time use, so also people who've never seen the API before should be able to use it. And it improves self-service adoption of APIs because people can sign up and get credentials for the APIs. So much about a developer portal. Let's look at a catalog next. A catalog usually organizes and governs API for better discoverability and consistency. And it's usually mainly used for internal technical stakeholders. A catalog you often see it covering all APIs of an organization, which means it includes everything that's part of the organization. So you see that here on the top right, it's usually a kind of centralized API inventory that you can search, filter, and categorize. But one problem with these centralized inventories is if you really add all APIs to them, you get into API sprawl and you have many APIs there that might not really have a good quality, that are not so easy to understand. So that's why usually in a catalog, you should also have some governance and policy enforcement features, something that makes sure that the APIs have a certain quality. You also usually have API metadata. Of course, you also need it for the categorization or filtering. So everything that's related with the metadata of the API. And usually if you do governance, you will also have some standardization of API contracts and dependencies, because you will somehow put it all together in your catalog in a certain way. So to summarize, a catalog improves API reuse by making APIs easier to find. So we hope if people see the inventory of APIs, they can find something by searching for the right API. Also, it should enforce governance and consistency across teams. And of course, by making it easy to find high-quality APIs, it reduces duplicate API development and sprawl if we're applying the governance. Otherwise, it might get lots of APIs, and if we have thousands of APIs in there, it will be difficult again to find something. So much for catalogs. Let's look at the next type of tools. That's something that's recently emerging, that we also find marketplaces in the API space. And a marketplace usually connects API providers with consumers to more enable monetization and partnerships. So another very important aspect of APIs. And if we think about it, if we think about monetization and partnerships, it's clear that the marketplace is more targeted to external business and technical stakeholders as the primary audience. There might be marketplaces internally, but most times it's more external because it's a little bit more polished view of the whole APIs, right? And it will only contain a curated or selected amount of APIs and not all the APIs of an organization. So usual features in a marketplace, you might have ratings, reviews, and community engagement. Because it's external, you might want to get in touch with your external developers and also get their feedback on your APIs. Also, it's of course much more important to have legal agreements and SLA visibility to engage external developers and partners and make sure they know what your APIs deliver. Also, you will have provider and consumer onboarding there, so you might need to invest more in onboarding on both sides. Also, and because you maybe want to add monetization to sell your APIs, you will have billing and revenue sharing mechanisms and also API pricing models. So these are more or less the features that you have in a catalog. So to summarize it all up, a catalog or a marketplace, expands API adoption beyond internal teams, right? The marketplace supports commercialization and revenue generation, and it helps business leaders track API consumption effectively, because to know what you used and how much you have to pay, you also need a good tracking of the consumption in the end. So now we talked about these 3 different kinds of tools, but there's still a missing piece. What about the API lifecycle and evolution? With the tools I just presented you, we can discover APIs. But how do we really ensure consistency, versioning, and smooth evolution? So everything that's on the API provider side, right? We didn't really look at them yet. We just looked at the consumers. And there's another type of tools emerging that's called registries. So registries are basically managing API artifacts for the lifecycle transparency. If you think about it, it's like a hub where you can put all your artifacts that you have. And the primary audience in this case are not the consumers, but the API owner, right? So we have a different kind of audience here, but we need to consider the API owner as well in our ecosystem. Typical features include versioning and change tracking. You also have the centralized API definition storage, a schema and dependency awareness, and also a lifecycle state management. So which state of the lifecycle is the API in? When does it enter a new stage? What are the criteria for it and everything regarding that? To summarize it up, a registry ensures this lifecycle transparency, it improves collaboration, and it provides a structured source of API artifacts, where we all know this is the source of truth. So, registries support API producers and governance teams by providing the structured artifact management, while the portals, catalogs, and marketplaces we looked at, they focus on API consumption. So that's my main key takeaway for you here. Just keep in mind that these have different target groups, right? But now the question is, when do we use what? Like, when can we apply which tool? What does make sense? When will we use a catalog? When will we use a marketplace? Or when will we use a registry? And the first thing is we need to go back to the consumer pains that we had at the beginning, right? We need to check what are actually the problems that we have. Is it that developers struggle to find and use APIs because there's no clear go-to point for them? Or do we have a problem with API sprawl? We have thousands of APIs and nobody has an overview, and this is complicating governance and also discoverability because there's so much that people don't find what they need. Or are we maybe ready to scale API adoption beyond internal use? Maybe we're already experienced with using APIs internally, but we want to provide APIs to our partners and external developers. To really get into the details, I have a table here that maps the consumer needs that we saw at the beginning. So discoverability, onboarding, integration and usage, and business alignment to the 3 tool categories that we saw for API consumers, developer portals, catalogs, and marketplaces. So let's check it. For discoverability, actually, developer portals are not the primary focus. Of course, you can find APIs there. You can also subscribe APIs, but the primary focus is not to search for all APIs or find a full inventory. For API catalogs, they're usually pretty well suited for discoverability because they provide the metadata and also a categorization or taxonomy. So there you will have the full discoverability. And the same is for API marketplaces, although we already said you probably only have a curated list of APIs, not the full list. And it's rather based on pricing or ecosystem fit instead of the categorization that we usually have in a catalog. For the onboarding, the developer portal is usually the perfect place for onboarding. We will have tutorials, interactive documentation, SDK, sandboxes, everything you need to technically get started with the APIs. For catalogs, it's usually not a core function to really help with the onboarding. And for API marketplaces, there's usually a limitation to, for example, the API descriptions. So it's not too much technical information because there's also lots of business information on there. For integration and usage, usually on developer portals, we'll have hopefully a self-service where people can subscribe to APIs, get the credentials, renew the credentials all on their own. For catalogs, as we said before, are primarily a governance tool and also something that's really best for governance. Integration and usage is usually not the main focus, right? For API marketplaces, on the other hand, you also have integration and usage. Usually you have more pre-built integrations and API contracts, so it's more targeted to pre-built stuff instead of a self-service. And then we have the business alignment. Developer portals are usually very developer-centric, so there is not much business content on there, and business people might also not go there. For API catalog, we can have business alignment regarding the API lifecycle governance. And for marketplaces, we usually enable monetization in partnerships. So we have the business alignment here on these parts that have to do with monetization and commercialization of the API. We also put that together in a nice diagram that we call API Consumer Access Model. You can see on top the API registry. And the API registry is, as we said, the single source of truth and structured storage for all API artifacts. And in this registry, the provider will put their APIs. And from there, we can sync it to any API access channels that we have. We might have a developer portal, a catalog, a marketplace, maybe also multiple of them, because we might have something for externals and internals, and that might differ, right? Or be a different tool or page. And then you also see here what are the typical consumers of these. So we broke it down a bit also with the features. So that's a nice summary picture for you to look at to decide which tool do I need, who do I want to reach, and how do I combine it maybe as well. Then I have some final thoughts and takeaway. So for you, the question to ask is, where are you today? Like, how do you enable your consumers today? What tools do you already have? How satisfied are your consumers with your tools? And where do you see any gaps in your API's ecosystem? Do you already cover all the features, like the governance part, the inventory part, the structured API artifacts, the contracts, the monetization? So which of these things are you still missing? Which target groups do you already reach? And which target groups maybe need a bit more, need maybe another tool or something else from you to really work with your APIs and discover your APIs in the best way? So that's it from me. Developer portal, catalog, or marketplace. All tools serve different but complementary roles. API consumer adaptation depends on the tool, on the right tool. So whatever you choose, it will influence who gets attracted to your tool, who will use your tool, and how people will use your tool, and also what features people will expect from your tool. And in the end, APIs are more than just interfaces, right? They power the ecosystems. So choose the right tool to support your consumers and unlock real business value by choosing the right tool. Thank you very much. That's it. I hope you enjoyed the talk.